Hello and welcome to today's Happy Maths Hour, and it's all about friezes. Now, we're not talking about the freeze that us in the Northern Hemisphere are about to experience during winter. We are talking about some very beautiful symmetrical shapes that have been created over the millennia. And Toni is going to tell us all about it.
Well, we can fit shapes together on a wall pattern or a tiling pattern on the floor. But the patterns we're going to be talking about today are strip patterns or frieze patterns. And here's a good example of one. So we have fish swimming from right to left and birds swimming from left to right, and they make a band. And you could imagine this band going on forever and long. It could be around a room or a building or whatever. It's actually an Escher painting. So you have got here the fish. If you focus on the fish, you will see that it's not an ordinary sort of reflection. It's what we call a glide reflection. So it's a bit like footsteps, isn't it? You could imagine, if you imagine yourself standing still on the spot with your feet together, your feet are a reflection of each other. Your little toes on the outside and your big toes on the inside.
And it's like a reflection and translation.
And your translation is half the distance between the two repetitions of itself, as you can see, or the other one of the reflection. So it's a translation and also a glide reflection. We'll call it a footstep reflection, if you like, which is half the translation length. So there we go. So we've got our pattern to start with. Now, spot here at the Roman baths in the UK, in Bath, spot the frieze pattern.
Okay, now I really like this one because the thing about the frieze pattern is it has to repeat. And what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing an eagle. I'm seeing, looks like perhaps agriculture or water flowing. I've seen architecture, I'm seeing agriculture, maybe the first one's medicine, or the last one's medicine. I'm seeing lots of different things. And so that's not a frieze pattern unless it repeats, right? But what I am seeing here is the advancement of science and technology and engineering that the Romans were clearly displaying at that time.
Isn't that interesting? Well, there is a spot the frieze pattern. There is a frieze pattern, but it's above the one you've just been talking about, Caroline. It's on the sort of overhang.
Facing downwards, like a roof, like an...
Yes, and then
horizontal overhang.
That's right. And then there's a second strip right at the top, which is also a frieze pattern.
Right, yeah. That would be like the edge of a guttering, as it were.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. So we've
what about on the column itself? That circular, is that a frieze? That looks like a frieze pattern.
Yes, that's a strip, and it's wrapped around the top of the column.
Okay, cool.
And there's an echo of the friezes above, horizontally above those, straight across above the columns. So we see the artists who created this, the sculptors who created this, were thinking about repetition of the same patterns over and over again, making frieze patterns. Now, here's a close-up of a frieze pattern. This is from Delphi in Greece, which is a wonderful, beautiful place up in the mountains with exquisite views from different temples and buildings. I'm sure that's why they chose the location. And here's a little tiny bit of Delphi in a frieze.
So we've had the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks. What's coming next?
Oh, well, this is India. I haven't got a date for this, but it's very old. And here you'll see not one, but many friezes. I love the bottom one with the elephants, one behind the other.
I like the fourth one up. There's like the third one of animals, and it's like a movie. It's like an action sequence of the horse rearing up. It looks like a horse. It's like a movie, isn't it? Like moving pictures, moving statues.
Yes, I'm not sure quite the one you're referring to. I'm not sure with the horses in it. I'm not sure about. Yes, it is, but they don't repeat exactly.
Right. So it's not exactly a frieze. One of the things that to bear in mind is that these are what they call one-dimensional friezes, not because they're not two-dimensional, but because they only exist in a line. It's not like a wallpaper, is it? They have to be in a line, a repeating line.
We're going to show you that there are only 7 possible frieze patterns. Yeah, and what we mean is not that there are, I mean, there are any number you like to imagine, different motifs or different things like elephants and flowers and other fancy decorations. But what we're saying is the way that the pattern repeats itself mathematically, there are only 7 different ways this can happen. Whereas if you come to wallpaper patterns, which cover the whole of a wall, then there's 17, and we won't go there. We're just going to keep it simple and talk about frieze patterns.
And that's what's called the two-dimensional one, is when you cover the whole wall, then you're talking the two-dimensional patterns.
Now here is another pattern from Athens in Greece, another Greek one from Greece. And this is, about 2,400 years ago, quite a long time ago. But there you are, the same, there's 3 strip patterns, bigger ones, and a couple of smaller ones between them. So there we have more friezes.
Yeah. And so they're each so different to each other.
Yes. And here's another one.
Now this is Persia. Okay, so this is what is now the Middle East.
Yes, and here you have, again, this is not a very sharp picture, sorry, but you have, here again, you have several different repeats of the same pattern.
And all these links, by the way, are in the description. You can just go to the description and click on all of these links.
And in fact, yes, you could see them for yourself. Now, here you see the 2 different sorts of translation. Now, a translation is where you just shift, if you like, you just repeat the pattern regularly with the repeats a certain distance apart.
Right, so it's like a stamp, but it's like a rotating stamp or a continually processing stamp.
Ah, you're going to show us something like that, aren't you, Carol?
Oh, am I? Oh, yes, I am.
Now, here, those black tire tracks, you can see both on the right and on the left that along this whole length of the track, there's a reflection of one side onto the other. And there's also the black tracks, the black sort of imprints appear at regular intervals. Okay, but the footprints are different because, as we described before, the right-hand foot is translated, the left-hand foot is translated by the same distance, by an equal distance, but the reflection is a sort of half that distance reflected, but then as you take your step forward, it's half. So it's what we call a glide reflection.
Okay.
Now we have got examples of the 7 frieze patterns. Hello, we're going to show you how to make your own frieze patterns. As you see behind Caroline and behind me, there are some frieze patterns. It's simply a long, thin band with a pattern that repeats itself over and over again. Behind me, you can see the HHHHH frieze pattern. And you can see, if you look at it, some reflections in vertical lines. Can you see reflections in vertical lines? Can you see reflections in horizontal lines? And can you see that you could rotate the HHH pattern? Now, a different pattern, it's not just that the little picture that gets repeated is different. It's actually, this one has no reflection in a horizontal line. Nothing, okay? And so Caroline's going to show you how to make these two patterns.
So what we're going to do is we're going to create a stencil. I'm using a toilet roll. As you can see, I've got two patterns on here. One is the shape of a tree, which doesn't have horizontal symmetry, but it has vertical symmetry. So if you had a mirror in the middle, it would be the same on either side. And on the other end is an H, which has both horizontal and vertical symmetry. So this is the equivalent of the DB. So you can see it's as though it was a D there and a B there, back to back. So half the tree is facing one way and half is facing the other, and it doesn't reflect top and bottom. It's completely different. So we've got those two of the 7 friezes that we're going to replicate. So I'm starting with a roll, the toilet roll, and what I do is I'm going to cut it, open it out, because it is actually quite hard to do if you don't open it out, and you don't want to be using sharp tools. If you're very clever at doing things like this, then you can find another way of doing it, but this is the way that I'm doing it. I've drawn a light background here just to get it right, so you want to be nice and accurate. Maybe draw it as I have done with pencil beforehand, and now we're going to draw it with nice thick marker, which is going to help us cut out nice and accurately. Right, we're ready to start cutting out. Just one cut. Okay, so you've got your shapes cut out, and then what you want to do is get some tape, and what I did is I taped this back to health and this back to health here. Make sure you don't go over that line there. Make sure you stay under that line, as I've done here and here. So tape those two front and back, and then tape it round, and I put some tape underneath, inside, and then tape on top. So now we've ended up with a nice, it's nice and chunky and solid now because this tape gives it strength. So now we're going to make our frieze. Are you ready? What I found was best. Now please do comment if you find something that works better, but I found that these highlighters worked really, really well.
Caroline is going to colour this H, and then she's going to roll the cylinder to show you how she can use the stencil to repeat the H between those two lines to make the frieze. So now she's going to colour this H, and she's going to very carefully, using her highlighter, try to get into all the corners. Take time to do this carefully.
Okay, now I'm going to have to fix that. I'm going to have to get a ruler and colour in the, because it is a bit awkward, so just perfect it with a ruler after you've finished.
Now, in any design, it could be printed on fabric, or it could be printing ink. did this rather than using a stencil. The pattern is repeated. I've just shown you how you can use just one copy, and it's that one copy that's repeated again. It can be repeated many times to make the frieze.
And then here's, it's a little bit rough, but you can see you can finish that off. There's the trees and the H's on a smaller piece of paper. You can use a nice long roll and repeat the pattern. There's the tree and there's the H.
So you see the H pattern is the third one down, okay, and the DB pattern is just above it that Caroline has shown you. So the H pattern she made there, and by rolling the cylinder along, she was able to repeatedly, she could have done it many times, and the DB pattern above it was the one that she did with a tree.
That's a lot fancier H pattern than the one I had.
Very much so, yes. Now this is a PPPP pattern, and why do we give it that label? So
it's because you've got it is literally, it has no mirror symmetry. You could that diagonal line you've got there, you could put it anywhere apart from right through the center, and you don't have the mirror symmetry. It's like you've got a stamp that just keeps going. So,
well, of course, that's an interesting thing is talking about the diagonal line, because basically any reflection has got to repeat the strip, within the confines of the strip.
Yeah.
So the pattern you could think might, well, the rectangle doesn't repeat itself. A square might, if you fold it on the diagonal.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reflections and no rotations in that. Simply
and the thing
a translation.
Right, and even if those were squares, the fact that the diagonal line goes under on one end and over on the other, again, even if they were squares, that might have rotational symmetry, but this doesn't, because one goes over and one goes under.
Yes. So anyway, this one is the simplest of all frieze patterns, and it only has a translation, and that's all, nothing else, a shift or translation. Now here's another one. This is what we call the EEE pattern. Can you see it has no reflection in the horizontal line at all?
Yeah. So if you reflect it, like, so you can see, I can see where the E is. It's like that horizontal line in the middle, that solid line is the middle of the E effectively. And again, it doesn't reflect backwards, that doesn't reflect on the vertical, but on the horizontal, straight through that line in the middle, it's the same top and bottom.
Exactly. So it's got the horizontal reflection line, but no rotational symmetry. And of course, it has got, says at the bottom, it's got translations and reflections in a horizontal mirror line. The next one is the one we talked about earlier, the DB, 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 with translations and reflections in a vertical mirror line, but not in the horizontal, like the Christmas tree. What about this one? What can you see in this one?
I can see the rotate. It's like rotated and translated. I can see that, because if you rotate it like a feather 180 degrees and then shift it down a bit, then that's what you've got there. So I can see the rotation and then the translation, but it's not one or the other. It needs both. It's a bit like it's on the same line as what did you call it when the footsteps, the slide.
Oh, but these are not. This is not a. There's no glide reflection here.
It's not a reflection.
No,
but no. It is, no, it's not an element. You couldn't call it a glide rotation.
Absolutely not, Caroline. Because
what
you have got is you can pick a point. I don't know whether you can see my cursor here.
Yes.
Can you see the cursor? Now,
Yes.
if you rotate it through 180 degrees, about where you just saw the cursor, it just seemed to have, oh dear, that's not done the right thing. There's the cursor. If you rotate it about that point, then the one feather will go to, each feather will go to another feather. Take them up. So, yes, I mean, there are no there are no reflections here. There are only rotations.
Oh, I thought I could see the reflection as not reflection. There is a translation, which is why
of course
it with the sliding.
Yes, there is a translation, but the whole pattern, yes, there is a translation and a rotation. But it's not a glide reflection because there's no reflection.
No, I was calling it a glide rotation. But I was just being creative, Toni.
Okay. Yes, but yeah. Okay. So we have what the H's again, and here you've got translations in horizontal and vertical lines and rotations. So you've got a lot more symmetry in here than in the other ones that we've seen. And here you've got the glides, like footsteps. So that one is a little bit different with the glide reflection in it.
Yeah. Because
the commas, if you like to call them that,
it's like left foot and right foot.
Yes,
they're a reflection of each other, but they alternate.
But it's tempting to say that there are reflections in vertical lines. But the fact that the tails of the commas cross over each other shows that they actually don't reflect in a vertical line.
Oh, that's right. Because yes, I see that now. Whereas if they were solid, they would. But yes, I can see that temptation, and that's a distinction that I hadn't noticed, Toni. Okay, yeah. If you reflect that one side in the mirror, it wouldn't be the same.
But the PB has no ambiguity about it.
Yeah,
you can see that there's no vertical mirror lines, but there are the footstep reflections there.
Yeah,
glide reflections. And this is the one that has everything in it, everything and everything. It has reflections in vertical mirror lines. It's got the glide footsteps reflections, and it's got rotations. So it's it's another one. I think if you look at the 6 together, that's showing you them one by one. With the letters, you can identify the pattern of the letter we're showing you. You'll see from the letters, you'll see if it's more difficult, it is more difficult to look at patterns and see it, but from the letters you can see that they're all different in terms of the different mathematical qualities that the transformations there. Okay. Now these, this way of labeling these PPP, DB, DB, HE, and the rest, that's just our way of doing it. It isn't the standard method that, for example, crystallographers use. It's just a simple way. We didn't want to get into anything complicated. Now we're going to Spain. This is a country you know well, isn't it, Caroline?
Yes, it is. And the Alhambra is one of the many jewels in the crown that is Spain. The Alhambra, of course, is not a Spanish creation. It's a Moorish. It was built by the Moors.
It was built by, yes, it goes back to the 1300s. It's
And they invaded, just like the Romans invaded the UK. The Moors didn't reach us, but they certainly they enriched the culture in Spain, and they brought their mathematics and they brought their architecture and their design and created the most incredible palace. If you haven't been to the Alhambra, go. I've got no more to say about it. Just do it.
But also they brought their religion, and they, as part of their religion, they don't allow any human form to be represented. So they have concentrated, Islamic patterns concentrate very much on designs, and in their mosques, you will see these, and their buildings or designs, but unlike a cathedral or a church, a Christian church, you won't see any representations of human beings. You won't see any statues. They were also well ahead in the 1300s, I mean, centuries ahead of the mathematical knowledge and culture in Europe. They brought this with them, and they didn't, I'm not a historian, but because they were an occupying force, the Spanish, the Castilian Spanish, wanted to drive them out, drive them back to Africa, and eventually they did that. And then the Castilian Spanish, who were of course Roman Catholic, transformed. They didn't pull down these mosques; they just simply adopted them and turned them into cathedrals. So you can visit some wonderful mosques, as they were, cathedrals as they are now, in places like Sevilla and Cordoba. And they will see a lot of the same decoration as you see in Granada. Granada is particularly famous for its wallpaper designs, not wallpaper, but the sort of design that would cover a wall, and they're often referred to as wallpaper designs, as the strip patterns we see today are referred to as frieze.
You have an example of that, don't you?
Well, we have to coming up. These are from the Alhambra Palace, and here is a little piece with quite a few of these friezes on it. But they sort of curve a bit, don't they? So they're probably going over an arch. I think that's, I'm not sure what arabesque means. Do you know what word arabesque means, Caroline?
That is such a great question. In ballet, it means it's a movement in ballet.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so I haven't actually ever invested. I'm going to Google it while you continue, Toni, and I'll let you know in just a moment. I'll be the producer of the show.
What is interesting about this was that when the Moors were finally driven out of Spain, a lot of Moorish scholars, a whole big group of Moorish scholars, were invited to the Vatican in Rome because the Pope recognized that their knowledge of mathematics and general learning was well in advance of what was being developed in Western Europe, Northern Europe. And they stayed at the Vatican, and there is a scientific institute at the Vatican to this day, and they were respected by the Pope of the time and the clerics who wanted to have this knowledge handed on to them so they could transmit it and develop it and transmit it. But even to when I was at school, the teaching of science was fairly new, and the it did happen when I was at school, but there was still a lot of emphasis on the classics. The educated person was supposed to know Latin and Greek, and there was much more emphasis on that than there was on the sciences in our culture.
We've got an answer to Arabesque. Louise Pepper, who's been watching and has commented on a few things. She actually went to the Alhambra last year, by the way. Arabesque is Islamic art with intersecting lines. Thank you, Louise. I did Google it as well. It says it's a style of decoration characterized by intertwining plants and abstract curvilinear motifs. So it's the intertwining that's
yes, and my guess that it was curving over an arch was right, but it was purely a guess. And how interesting that it's also, as you pointed out, Caroline, a term for one of the ballet.
It has to be, from what I understand, the intertwining is important. If you see don't think it's the bits. I don't think it's so much the shell shapes as the top where you have the knots, like the Celtic type knots going on. That I think that's a characteristic we're looking at.
Now here we've got a tessellation or wallpaper pattern, which you see the design again from Alhambra covers the whole wall. There's a strip pattern or a frieze pattern, a dark coloured one just above it between two green lines of tiles, and above that there's another strip pattern. But here we have a wallpaper pattern, and here you can see repetitions, but there are, because you are moving in all the directions across the plane, there are more variations, and there are 17 of these patterns together. I just put this in because I thought it was absolutely beautiful. This is an example of artwork, a vase here from Alhambra again, with around the middle, around the widest part, there's a strip pattern or frieze, and well, it's beautiful.
There's one on the base of the neck as well, isn't there?
Oh yes, yes.
It's beautiful.
Now here is a travel story from a 19th century traveller who visited Alhambra. A picture there from his book, and there, I don't know whether it was a self-portrait or he just drew just a tourist in his top hat and long coat from the period 1850 period. But there you see
19th century tourists. It was done in a different style to today's tourists.
But there you see lots of patterns. There you see the frieze patterns, you see the wallpaper patterns, you see the many patterns in one arch and one space in Alhambra. Again, interesting. Now here's a complete change of scene. We're now moving across the globe to Australia. And Heather Maclay, who was a mathematician, she was a maths educator like ourselves, and she visited Spain and Australia, and she was really entranced. She was really enthused by these frieze patterns on lots of buildings. And again, these were 19th century buildings, but of course she was visiting Brisbane and other Australian cities about 20 years ago. I think she took these pictures, and she wrote an article for NRICH, which you have the link for there.
And again, that link is in the description.
Yes, yes. And we think this is a house, very interesting house. The whole design is very mathematical. And you can see the frieze patterns on that. Here's a close-up of frieze pattern, which is a garden gate. That's a really ornate garden gate, again from Brisbane. Now, what can we see in that? There doesn't seem to be a horizontal reflection line, although some bits of it have images by a horizontal reflection line, but the top and bottom of those designs are very different, aren't they?
Yeah.
That looks like the PD pattern to me, because it has got reflections in vertical lines, but not in horizontal lines.
But you could also split that up into several. So the very, very top one is more of just the translation, because they alternate, they change.
Oh, yes, the top one is
then the next bit down you could do is the PD, and then the middle bit, those kind of circles, they actually could be, I'm not sure which one, which has lots of the H maybe, yeah, the H, and the one in the middle perhaps, and then at the bottom you got the something else again. So you could actually split it all up into lots of different types of patterns.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, we if you look at it as a whole, I think it's a PD. But Caroline's very interestingly, Caroline's interestingly said, well, all right, you might consider it as 4 separate frieze patterns. Okay, that's the gate. What about this one? This one is a house, again, very ornate, but here it isn't. I couldn't make out whether that earlier one was a hexagon or an octagon. I felt it must
it looked octagonal to me, because you could see the three edges, and then if you finished it off, you'd have a 4th edge. It looked octagonal to me.
I think it was, but this one is more the regular rectangle. But again, it's got this balcony, the fence on the balcony, and the canopy there are all frieze patterns. Can't really see the detail in this photograph.
Yeah, and the idea with this is that you encourage that you yourself watch out for frieze patterns. I have started, since Tony's introduced this concept to me, I have started noticing frieze patterns in the most unexpected places. And the idea is to encourage your young learners to watch out for frieze patterns and identify what kind of frieze patterns they are.
If you go to an old property, you know, one of these grand old houses, you sometimes see, and until about the 1920s, 1930s, or even 40s and 50s, a lot of people in their own smaller homes had wallpaper, but quite often they had a strip around near the top of the wall that was a frieze strip near the top of the wall. And I think
one at waist height as well, around the room at waist height. They still have that in the older houses, where they'll have like a little wooden band around, and then either above it or below it they'll have a frieze pattern.
Yes, and you often see a strip pattern, a frieze pattern in the tiling in bathrooms, even modern bathrooms. That's they're not usually as elaborate as these patterns we're seeing, but certainly we often see frieze patterns there. Now here is 4 different examples, and they don't have my labeling. They have the classic, correct, if you like, labeling for these frieze and wallpaper patterns. As I say, it's a little bit more complicated, so I decided not to go there.
And these are in 4 different cities as well. One's in Paris. It's one in, I'm not sure if it's the Bangor house in Sydney or the Sydney house in Bangor, but one or the other, and Brisbane and Melbourne, all different cities and all different friezes. I really like that, the last one on the bottom right.
Yes, yes. I think if you look at the house on the top right, the name of the house is Bangor.
Right, and it's in Sydney.
and it's in Sydney. And I think that Heather was impressed because she actually taught at Bangor University and lived in Bangor. So she must have been some Welsh people from Bangor, I suppose, originally, who'd number 190.
Could have been Northern Ireland. There's a Bangor in Northern Ireland as well.
Oh my goodness. Well, it could well have been Northern Ireland. Of course it could. That's interesting. Yeah. So here you have 4 more examples. And 3 more here. Again, these are mostly built in the 19th century in different cities around the world. You've got a couple here, not from Heather's travels in Australia, but 2 in Paris and 1 in New Orleans. It's
There's a lot of frieze work in New Orleans, a lot of it. It's beautiful.
Have you been to New Orleans?
No, it's a destination I want to go to, but I've admired the pictures a lot. And there's that same kind of the terrace of the porch around that house early on. That's very well more flat along the front of buildings along the street. You know, the apartments and things. You've got the terraces going up and the verandas, and they have that same kind of ornate metalwork. So beautiful.
Well, that's all we've got on friezes today. So I think it's time to say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Toni.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. See you soon. For greater understanding and enjoyment of mathematics, the Maths Toys YouTube channel is brought to you by AIMSEC and the Aiming High website. In the description, you will find a link to our home learning guide for ages 4 to 18 and a teacher resource pack. If you find this video useful, there is a GoFundMe link in the description to donate to and support AIMSEC. The money goes to bursaries for professional development for teachers in disadvantaged communities around the world. Subscribe, comment and ding the notification bell to make sure you don't miss our latest activities.